We have our second ever live show, which is taking place on the 11th of December in Tottenham in North London. And it's a Christmas special, Gary.
It's Wednesday, 11th of December at the Bernie Grant Arts Centre in Tottenham. Tickets start from £8. We will also be joined by a special guest to be announced soon. Bring your mince pies. We're going to have a do. 11th of December, Bernie Grant Arts Centre, Tottenham.
Hi, I'm Carys Sofoco.
And I'm Gary Young.
Every week, Gary and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are over-reported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar. And this episode is brought to you by Movement, all your digital campaigning tools in one.
How you doing, Gary?
Not bad. It was a busy weekend. I went to Ireland because my nephew, Harry, was running in the marathon to raise money for the Alzheimer's Society in Ireland because my middle brother has dementia. Marathons are kind of weird, complicated things to watch, really. You kind of, you walk half an hour to see your person, then you see them for not that long, and you cheer on a bunch of people that you don't know, and then you walk an hour towards the finish line to cheer on your person. You get a bit more person time because they're really knackered, so they go much slower, and then you go and eat a lot.
I feel like you do get a vicarious high, though, right? The couple of times I've watched people run marathons, you get this like adrenaline rush from seeing how much people like to be cheered for. And then part of you's like, maybe I'll run a marathon. And then you leave and you're like, no, never. Could never be me.
Yeah, I got to say, I did not leave thinking maybe I'll run a marathon. In fact, I left thinking I'll never do that. I've done it once before. I have run a marathon once before when I was...
You've run a marathon? How do I not know this about you?
I have. I was 15 or 16.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. It was at school, and it took like 7 hours or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was not
natural. The body doesn't want to run that far. It doesn't. It doesn't run 26 miles. Come on.
So this is an election special. America, they go to the polls on November the 5th, an incredibly consequential election. As a journalist, I was a US correspondent in The Guardian for 12 years, but even before then, I used to write. I covered 6 elections from 96 to 2016. The Trump one, it took me quite a long time to actually even fathom what had happened. I was in Muncie, Indiana. I can't exactly explain it. By the time I got there, we already had Brexit. And I thought, yeah, Trump could win. Trump could win. And I didn't expect that he would, but I wasn't actually kind of shocked that he did. And I was a little bit removed.
Have you got any plans were you going to be in the UK for this one? You're going to be staying up?
I will be in the UK. I don't know that I will stay up. How about you?
I'd stayed up for one, which was the Obama one, and that was kind of magical. Even in the UK, I remember like being at some election party, staying up, and then like I remember, getting breakfast and buying the papers and just being like, what the fuck just happened? This is so exciting. But I've only been in the US for one election campaign, and that was a midterm. But yeah, I don't think I'll stay up this time. I think it's go to bed if you can, get as much sleep as you can, and then wake up and hopefully it's Christmas morning.
Yeah, I mean, my angst is I don't want to wake up to find that Trump is going to be the president. I'd rather wait and see that in real time.
And we've had some tweets from supporters and listeners. Thank you to everyone who's got in touch. You can contact us on email, info@overunderpod.com, or on social media. You can just say hello, or you can tell us what you think about the show. And I've got a question for Pete, who emailed about the US electorate. Does money make the US neoliberal duopoly inevitable? That's a big one. It's a good one. What do you think?
Well, I think it makes it difficult. But if we just think back just a couple of cycles to Bernie Sanders' surging campaign, both in 2016 and 2020, then we can see that there is still room for now. The money doesn't help. We can't yet say it's inevitable.
Well, I'd throw in another example from the 2020 election, which is Michael Bloomberg's candidacy. I don't think the system makes the duopoly inevitable. If anything, I think US political parties, people typically have weaker ties to them. But it does mean that to be an insurgent candidate, so for those who don't know, former Mayor Bloomberg, he's a very wealthy man, toyed about with and did nascently launch an independent campaign for the presidency. And because he's so wealthy, he was able to spin up an operation. I don't think that the money in US politics makes a duopoly inevitable, but it does create this very high barrier to entry that is kind of easily vaulted over by the independently wealthy. Thank you for that question, Pete.
We are very glad to be sponsored in this particular episode by Movement, but broadly speaking, we rely on you, our listeners, from week to week to make this a going concern, to make this something that can survive. If you like it, if you enjoy it, if it helps you get through the week, if you learn something from it, any of those things, then please put your money where your ears are and join our Patreon. This week's new signups: Alice, Alex, Sharon, Victor, and Lucy.
Thank you so much to all of you for your generous support. It really means a lot to us and all of the Over Under team. We've hit our target with 309 paying Patreon supporters by the end of Black History Month, which is amazing. It's still not quite enough to cover the cost of the podcast, so we are setting a new target to get to 400 Patreon supporters by Christmas Day, the 25th of December. If you have some spare cash to support the podcast and the people who make it, packages on Patreon start at just £3 a month. So you can keep the show running and access weekly bonus episodes, a newsletter, and be part of the exclusive and incredibly fun Over Under WhatsApp community. So if you want to support us, go to the Patreon website and search Over the Top Under the Radar, and you can put your money where your ears are, as Gary would say.
What's your over for this one, Carys?
Thanks for asking. So my over the top for this American election this week is that, well, it's a phrase, but there's more behind it. Threat to democracy.
You're over democracy, or you're over the threat?
I'm not over democracy, and I'm not over the idea that there is a threat to democracy. I think democracy is under threat. I'm over the reporting and the political messaging that Donald Trump represents a threat to democracy. So there's a couple of things I don't like about this. And if you just Google the phrase threat to democracy and they'll Google News it, you're going to get dozens of headlines just from the last week. I think the core of why I don't like the threat to democracy messaging headlines is that it really feels a bit resonant of Brexit and Project Fear. I think it is progressives at our weakest when all we can say to people is, this thing is horrible, this thing will be terrible, you shouldn't do it. The second thing is, there is a poll from the New York Times published on the 27th of October in partnership with Siena College that found that nearly half of US voters think that the government does a poor job of representing them. About half are skeptical that self-governance is working. About 3/4 think that democracy is under threat. So there is a very real feeling amongst American people that there is a problem in democracy. But Democrats and Kamala Harris, when they invoke Trump as this threat, I don't think they're talking about how to fix democracy. And I don't think they're engaging with the fact that a lot of people in America don't feel that the democracy is functioning healthily. They're just invoking some boogeyman. And then I think the final problem is that there is this big issue in America around trust in the federal government and increasingly trust in elections. So there are people who think that there's a crisis in democracy and a threat to democracy. But if they're Republican or Republican leaning, they think that's because the 2020 election was rigged or because Democrats are bad for democracy. So I think you're in this zero-sum game where invoking this thing is weakening the thing that you say you care about. It's relying on a fear-based argument against a candidate who I think can't be toppled by fear. And finally, I think you're not telling people a complete story about what you're going to do to fix democracy. So that's why I don't like the phrase. There's a lot of debate in Democratic and progressive circles about what messaging succeeds against Trump. And one of the big PACs, Future Forward PAC, had a leaked email that said, attacking Trump's fascism is not that persuasive. So that's why I don't like the threat to democracy, Gary. I do like democracy for what it's worth.
I agree with most of that, particularly about the messaging and the way in which, in true, is it jiu-jitsu style, where you use the weight of your opponent against you, that the Republicans are also doing. Democrats are a threat against democracy. The one way in which it could arguably might help might be in galvanizing your own base. You're not going to win over Trump people by saying he's a threat to democracy, but there might be something where it's like, I'm not interested in Harris, she's done nothing for me, blah, 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 but this could be the last time I vote. I know that he has been president before and the sky didn't fall in, although it did for the kids in cages and stuff like that. I mean, it was a pretty demonic, pretty awful time. And you had Charlottesville and him encouraging Charlottesville and all that. But I think
and January the 6th, where January people tried to stop him being kicked out.
But this election, I think, is different because there's a chance that if he doesn't win this election, he could go to jail. He's on trial. And he is kind of saying some things that he didn't or wouldn't have said last time. So I think he's more desperate. And we've seen January the 6th, what his people might do and how they regard the democratic process. The other thing I would say, actually, that does support your point is that I remember covering the 2004 election and Democrats were saying our democracy is at stake. George Bush was a threat to democracy. This has been going on for some while. I don't remember either Mitt Romney or John McCain being described as such, but certainly they described Bush as such. And that it does beg the question, well, what kind of democracy have we got? How much influence do you think you have over what happens as opposed to, for example, really rich people? If the Supreme Court can be packed in a way that it is, if you have areas that are gerrymandered in the way that they are, the Republicans, bearing in mind, have only won the popular vote once since 1988. Which doesn't mean that things can't get worse. Also, if you look at the Electoral College and the way that that's skewed towards rural and white voters, there's a bunch of stuff that's wrong with what they're calling American democracy. And that makes it difficult to defend.
I think that is also the sort of crux of the challenge, right? There are real issues with American democracy, which I'm sure lots of people are not ignorant of. The reality of the thing being true doesn't always mean it's the most effective thing to communicate about. And you're right, a second Donald Trump term will almost definitely be worse than the first one. But I think the concern for me is these appeals to Trump being a fascist, to him being a threat to the fabric of society, I think are less effective when he's already an actor on the political stage. But I also think if you didn't think that when January the 6th happened, are you going to think that because a comedian made a racist joke about Puerto Rico when a bunch of his armed supporters stormed the Capitol building, stormed the heart of American democracy in Washington, D.C.? When that happened, if you weren't like, this guy's a bit extreme, has anything that's happened in the last year over the course of the campaign pushed you into that column? And so then instead you get this situation where there are two very polarized sides. So people who have a strong affiliation in the US, Democrats and Republicans, are polarized on almost every issue. It's really hard to find something that unites someone. So like election confidence is a great example. 90% of Harris supporters, this is according to Pew, feel somewhat confident the elections will be administered well. 57% of Trump supporters are confident the election will run smoothly. So you've got a camp of people who, many of whom don't believe that Trump lost the last election. They believe it was stolen. One of the reasons we think, the mail-in ballots and early voting is high from Republicans is because they have lower trust in the system. So you've got a group of people who don't feel that democracy is in a good place because they believe Trump was deprived of the vote. And so you're playing into polarization. I don't think anything's happened in the last year more scary or dramatic than Charlottesville or the events of January the 6th, 2021. So then it's like, who is this for? And the only example I can think of where I thought the messaging maybe was a bit interesting or potentially might have appealed to people, these, mythical undecided voters, was Trump's former chief of staff, who's a former general, John Kelly. People who've worked with Trump saying, I wouldn't put him back in the Oval. Other than that, I think it's one of those arguments where you can feel morally very righteous. I don't know that it's electorally helping you that much. Gary, tell me about your under the radar. What aren't we talking about enough?
My under the radar is cities. The way that we imagine the electoral map. I've had some discussion about this before, but in the run up to the election and what comes immediately afterwards, I think is going to be particularly important. So here's the thing. We think of the American electoral map as being in states because that's how the electoral college works. It's really 50 elections in each state. Then you add up the number of electoral college votes in each state, and that gives you the winner. You got to get to 270. And there are red states, they're Republican, there are blue states, they're Democrat, and then there are what they call purple states. They are the swing states. But actually the votes particularly for Democrats, are in the cities. And there is, with the possible exception of Oklahoma City, any city that's got more than 500,000 people in it votes Democrat. Doesn't matter if it's in Texas or any of the red states, they vote Democrat. So the electoral map is more like an archipelago, really, than these red and blue states. It's the cities. There's reason for that. Cities demand a certain kind of investment. That's where you're going to get more diverse populations. It's where you have more public things like public transport and so on. But if we take, for example, Illinois, without Cook County, Illinois would be Republican. With Cook County, which has Chicago in it, Illinois is Democrat. I think it's the same for Oregon. Without Portland, Oregon is Republican. Why does this matter? Well, first of all, it's a different way of understanding the way that people vote, or where people vote, I guess. But because when the voting is done, where will these pressure points be on accusations of fraud and so on? And they will be in the cities. It will be Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Detroit, Milwaukee. That is where Republicans will say that there has been fraud. It is a kind of deeply racialized notion. Can't trust black people, can't trust immigrants, can't trust brown people. They're all cooking the books. That's why Fulton County, which includes Atlanta, that's where Trump's being prosecuted in Georgia. In Philadelphia, a few white people showed up at the vote counting place with guns. If it's close, that is where the tension will be, and that is why. I remember covering the 2018 midterms, and I was in a town called Racine, Wisconsin, which is in between Chicago and Milwaukee. And when you went to Republican events, Milwaukee, which is the biggest city in Wisconsin, was a laugh line. It was but he's from Milwaukee. And that was a way of saying he's dysfunctional, he's corrupt, he's ridiculous. And sure enough, when the votes came in for governor, the Republican candidate was marginally ahead, somewhat ahead, but the votes hadn't come in from Milwaukee. And it was when the votes came in from Milwaukee, that was when it was over for him.
That's interesting, especially because the diversity of American cities, regardless of where in the United States it is, the city will still lean Democrat. But I feel like we do get some reporting of rural-urban divide, or specifically the Appalachia or the different terms for kind of Midwestern states. Do you think it's a political divide that's felt amongst American people?
Oh, I definitely think it is. And that when they talk about crime, even though crime is going down, and it's going down all over America, the cities become, for Republicans, this scary thing. And that while the cities are Democrat, quite often minority majority, and they have black or Latino mayors, and the rural areas, once you get out of the Northeast and places like Vermont, New Hampshire, the rural areas are mostly Republican. A big part of the fight is in the suburbs. And in the suburbs, what you're weighing is partly the fear of the city. Now, the suburbs in America have become more diverse, but if you listen to Republican kind of messaging, they evoke the cities quite often.
So a sort of dog whistle way of bringing in race.
It's a dog whistle way of bringing in race, but it's also an important way of motivating its base. Fascism in most of Europe, its base isn't in the cities or necessarily the rural areas. Where it is strongest is in the fringes of the cities. It's not where there are migrants or black people. It's where people fear migrants or black people most, where they think that they might move in.
Yeah, I don't know if I would agree with that for all geographies. I think that you do get a lot of racism in areas where there are no people of colour and no likelihood of them moving. I'm thinking of like lots of parts of Wales.
That's my point, that it's not where there are people who are diverse, it's where they fear people who are diverse.
So you're saying like the suburbs as opposed to rural areas, whereas I would say I think both.
It's not that there isn't racism in the rural areas, it's that the rural areas are banked for one group of people, whereas in the suburbs and the peripheries of towns, those are contested spaces where you will find significant fear of minorities.
So do you think that's something we're going to see at the counts then? A lot of a sense of like votes from the city either being illegitimate or there being more meddling?
That will be the accusation, as it was last time. The last time, that was the accusation without a huge amount of preparation. But this time they've been preparing quite hard. And they've been challenging lots of voter rolls and so on. They are ready for it. It will be the notion that ultimately, I think in the Trumpian mind, this election cannot be decided by these people. They are almost illegitimate players in this field. So it's a deeply racialized wolf whistle, more than a dog whistle, really, the way that Trump does it. But there is this sense that, like, these cities are where bad things happen. These are the people who will steal your democracy.
I think it's interesting as well in the choice, because so much of Trump's identity is about, or so much of his politics seems to be rooted in his origin story of being from New York and Queens. And I thought it was interesting that there was a sense of, by Trump having one of his final rallies in Madison Square Garden, which is in New York City, it was this sense of like, we're in enemy territory, or like our movement has even come to this city. We can get 20,000 people in New York to fill up the stadium.
Now, time to thank our partners, Movement. At a time when progressive ideals are under threat across the world, it's more important than ever to have the right platform to mobilize effectively. Our partners for this podcast, Movement, provide the tool you need.
Through Movement's platform, you can mobilise your support and fundraise through SMS, email, WhatsApp and phone. The likes of Hope Not Hate, Unison and the Labour Party have used it to raise donations, engage their supporters and win this year.
It's easy to use. Movement is designed to connect with any pre-existing software or spreadsheets, so anyone can send effective communications that get people behind your cause.
And it's free for the first 10,000 users. So if you're running a campaign for progressive causes, then get in touch with Movement at www.movement.industries/over-under-promotion to see how they can help you win. So my under the radar, it's a person, Lina Khan. Do you know who Lina Khan is?
Is she related to Shaka Khan?
I mean, if she is, she hasn't told anyone about it.
Okay.
So
Then no.
I think maybe not.
Okay.
Lina Khan is the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, as the cool kids call it. Basically, the sort of competition regulator. So they tackle monopolies and stand up for American consumers. So the reason Lina Khan is my under the radar for this election is one of the things that the president of the United States gets to do is appoint a huge number of government positions. Obviously, very famously, if there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court, then the president gets to nominate them. But just as part and parcel of the office, whether Kamala Harris or Donald Trump wins next week, they will have hundreds, potentially thousands of senior and less senior government appointments. And Lina Khan, who was made FTC chair by Joe Biden, is an example of the power of those appointments. Quick primer on Lina Khan. She is a woman of colour, 35, like ridiculously young, as a law student in 2017. She writes this really influential paper saying Amazon's a monopoly. We should probably break it up. And the way that we think about competition and monopolies in the digital age needs to change. So she's made a real shift to taking the FTC, which wasn't a very activist regulator, to being much more interventionist, much more pro-worker, much more anti-monopoly and pro-consumer. And whoever wins next week will have the chance to keep her on or replace her. And the reason I wanted to talk about her, and I think that she is flying under the radar, is Lina Khan is an example of the kind of people that progressives want to see in government. And she's come under huge amount of scrutiny because she's going after big companies. So she's going after Amazon, she's going after Facebook, she went after pharmaceutical companies over the price of inhalers. And as you see with any left-wing figure, especially a young woman of color, there is a lot of really public lobbying against her. So 3 huge Democratic donors, Barry Diller, founded Expedia, Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn, Microsoft, PayPal, OpenAI, have all said they want Kamala Harris to fire her. Just to be clear, companies that Lina Khan is investigating and people who financially benefit from the FTC being a weak regulator don't like that it's doing its job. And I think, a real test for Kamala Harris if she wins is what happens to Lina Khan.
And do you get a sense of them defending her at the moment when all these people are attacking her, or are they just being stum?
Yeah, so what we've seen is Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, the AFL-CIO, I guess the American equivalent of the TUC, have all come out to back her. The thing I want to emphasize is the scale of the opposition. So Jon Stewart, American comedian, this year had Lina Khan on the Daily Show podcast. He said to her that when he wanted her on a different podcast, Apple got in touch and said, please don't talk to her. I'll give you another stat. The Wall Street Journal opinion page has printed more than 100 opinion pieces ranting about Lina Khan's record. So yes, Bernie, I think AOC, Elizabeth Warren, trade unions do come to her defense. But like the scale of hostility and opposition to her, I think it's important to remember it and to hold it up. This is how they come for you if you're doing something serious. I'm not saying that by any means she is perfect or all of her interventions have gone well. I think it is pretty marked how open and naked the sort of wealthy Silicon Valley wing of the Democratic Party, and let's not forget, also huge donors to the Republican Party, like how openly hostile they have been to someone doing their job.
The nature of the attacks on her, I did see the interview with her on Jon Stewart, and she was really effective in terms of breaking down what she was doing in a way that was understandable in a kind of system is rigged. But I'm interested in whether the attacks on her focus on what she's doing or on her as a woman of color.
Both, Gary. I mean, why attack on one front? Just attack her entirely. I mean, and to your point, she's an incredible communicator. She's phenomenally bright. There's been, broadly speaking, 2 types of attacks on Lina Khan. And I'm not saying that there's no truth in any of them or that she's a perfect manager. But when she first got the job, there was a wave of briefings that she didn't know how to run the FTC. She was a terrible manager. She did make some decisions that staff were unhappy with. And I'm not in the weeds to know whether they were good or bad decisions. Like she didn't think FTC people should be doing public speaking gigs. There was a huge wave of attacks about her as a manager, her abilities as a leader, and whether she was qualified for the job, which I would say are almost definitely because she was a young woman of color. And I would imagine there are some calls that she made that had it been someone people were more comfortable with in the FTC chair, that she would have been a decisive, strong leader, shaking things up. But instead, she was this underqualified, out of her depth, bad manager, ineffective. And then venture capitalists are very angry with her because, one of the things that she has pushed on that I personally really agree with is this idea that there are a lot of tech monopolies that exist because companies like Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft were allowed to acquire other companies. So there's a pretty credible argument to be made that if Facebook hadn't been allowed to buy WhatsApp and Instagram, it wouldn't be as powerful as it is today, or Meta, which is now the name of the parent company. And so Lina Khan's assessment is that allowing Facebook to buy WhatsApp and Instagram was allowing it to maintain a monopoly. Unsurprisingly, people who make a lot of money from mergers and acquisitions and from tech companies have claimed that the industry is losing money. And Reid Hoffman, who's very famous in the world of Silicon Valley, he's a Democratic mega donor, like think a Democratic equivalent to Peter Thiel or Elon Musk. And surprise, surprise, he also was a PayPal alum, so knows both of them. He talks a lot about her being bad for business, and if Kamala Harris cares about business, he would get rid of her.
Yeah, and I would just say, by way of rounding it up, that speaks to your earlier point about American democracy and threat to American democracy, because this is kind of one of these ways in which American democracy is a bit of a mockery, right? The very, very rich people get to put the pressure on and say, well, we'll withdraw the money and so on and so forth. My over the top is black men.
You're over black men? No.
Yes. Well, and here's the thing. On a certain level, when an election's this close, any particular group could swing it. So there is a case for focusing on a demographic like black men. This would be one where it's the way that they are doing it, and then there's a bunch of things they're not saying. So Kamala Harris's support among black people in general is significantly weaker, actually, than Biden's, and not that surprisingly, a lot weaker than Obama's, but particularly black men. Black women, they're at 83% now for Harris. There were 96% for Barack Obama, 91% for Biden. Black men at a certain point they thought had fallen off a cliff. At one point they were down to, in August, they were down to, according to some polls, 51%. Now, depending on what polls you read, they are either back up to 69%. There was one Howard University Initiative poll where they were 81%. I don't know about that. But lower than black women and lower than it was. They're men, so there will be an element of sexism in this, for sure. It's also true that when there are only men on the ballot, African-American men are still more likely to vote Republican than African-American women. But first of all, there is a suggestion that this polling may be overblown, that the polling itself is shaky, that most places aren't polling enough black men, and they're also not making enough of a distinction between older and younger. Younger black men are more likely to vote for Trump than older black men, but older black men are more likely to vote. The sexism in the black male community, I think, is a perfectly reasonable place to go, but black men are significantly more likely to vote for Kamala Harris. They were significantly more likely to vote for Hillary Clinton than white men. So if you're going to talk about sexism in the black male community, you might want to compare it to other examples. Black men are still the most likely of any male group, maybe with the exception of Native Americans, to vote for Kamala Harris, which I guess you could say, well, that's pretty weak beer, the argument about who is the least sexist, but they are the most likely, and they're still one of the most loyal constituencies. But the way that it's talked about is as though the black vote belongs to the Democratic Party. Now, why any black person would vote for Trump is, I find, slightly confusing, not because they might not be really kind of awful in terms of their sense of capitalism or even in their attitudes towards women, but Trump's attitudes to black people in general, it kind of has that smack of turkeys voting for Christmas. But, that's up to them. But the point is, they don't belong to the Democratic Party. And for as long as I ever covered American politics, they took black people's votes for granted. They have not delivered for African Americans. The symbolic value of Obama's presidency didn't live up to substantial deliveries for the black community. So Kamala Harris, in the last couple of weeks, has felt the need to produce a response to their needs. She's launched a kind of agenda supporting issues that will be of concern to black men, including $20,000 in forgivable loans for black entrepreneurs. Obviously, that works for black men and black women. Initiative to tackle sickle cell disease.
She did that All the Smoke podcast, which is like a basketball podcast that is like mostly listened to black men, which felt like quite a niche appeal.
She's done that, and the Breakfast Club, the creation of new opportunities for black men to participate in the emerging cannabis industry. And I guess what this to me shows is that their reticence has actually produced results, that they see the need, she sees the need, her team sees the need to produce an agenda that attempts to do something for them, which they hadn't seen the need to do prior to what seemed like this crisis. So first of all, it may not be quite the crisis that people say. The polling might be off. But secondly, rather than, I think, questioning what is wrong with black men, the way to understand this better is what is wrong with the Kamala Harris campaign and what can they do differently, because it could make a difference.
Okay, so you're not over black men in the election, you're more over the way they're being reported.
I'm over the way that they're being reported, yes.
Okay, that's fair. The drop is interesting, right? But it's just too hard to tell a simple story and totally know what is driving it and like how much. I think, as you say, it is a bit of a leap to assume it's sexism. You're right. There is something where we all have identities and it shapes all of our politics. But like some people are considered by journalists kind of more appropriate for identity politics stories. Good if this is translated into a retail offer for black male voters. But the idea that black men, black women, Latino voters have this identity and we need to cater to them, I think is just a bit baked in that then white people are the default and they have no identity and all of the political offers for them. So yeah, it's a funny one.
I remember in 2008 being in South Carolina, any African-American beauty salon was inundated. This is during the primaries. Obama was standing against Hillary, 2008, and they would say, what are you going to do? Are you going to vote your race for Obama or your gender for Hillary? And I thought, first of all, that's a pretty basic way to understand this. But secondly, are you now going to white men and saying, are you going to vote for your race or for your gender? Are you going to vote for Obama or Hillary? White men also have races and genders. So, black voters in general are understood in a certain basic way. I also think the age thing is important because she's doing worse than Biden did too. So it's not just about Obama, but the age thing is also important, I think, in terms of how younger black people, and I'm talking younger as opposed to young, so under kind of 35, how they understand symbolic representation, because it's never as good as the first time. They've grown up with an understanding that a black president is possible. They possibly voted for him if they're in the upper part of that age bracket, and they're looking for something more because Obama didn't deliver in the way that they might like. And a lot of younger black Americans see him as the kind of guy that is wheeled out for the respectability politics.
Yeah, I think the thing that we can't fully know given we're in this current moment, which I think is a trend potentially beyond the United States, is also this sense that progressive parties are entitled to people of colour's votes, or that there is some affinity or connection. That's got an expiry date, and there's some evidence to suggest that that's already kicked in the UK, right? That black and brown people didn't overwhelmingly just turn up and vote Labour. Okay, Gary, you lived in America for ages, you reported in America for ages. Any final tips for people as they're like watching the votes come in, snacks they should try, seats they should watch?
We'll put them in the newsletter. So there are some counties you should probably follow. I mean, this is really going to be decided in 7 different places. And within those places, it will be decided in a handful of those places. So the exit polling is usually a little bit dodgy in the demographics it uses and so on. Mostly my experience of how people respond to American elections in the run-up to them is there's quite a lot of bedwetting. And that can go either way. That it can either be like, oh my God, Kamala Harris has done this and that is absolutely going to do such and such, or Trump has done this and it will absolutely, and large numbers of people have already voted. It's not that there is nothing at this point to play for, but there is among liberals, there's an excessive amount of wishful thinking. You're going to live longer if you don't do that. It's going to be about who shows up. And so my message is show up, America. Show up, because lots of people are going to die if you don't.
Show up. It matters. Vote wherever you are. Don't vote for anyone. Vote for Kamala Harris. Don't vote for Trump. Thank you for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. This episode is brought to you by Movement, all your digital campaigning tools in one. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you want more US election chat, the Over Under WhatsApp group will be live till early in the morning on the 6th of November and across the following days.
If you want to support the show and join the WhatsApp community, you can find us on the Patreon website. Just search for Over the Top, Under the Radar.
And you can sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com.
And you can connect with us on social media at over_under_pod_.